Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. We are live on the first live cast of the show for season 4. And I've got the amazing Chris Smith on the show. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. So just before we start, for those of you that are joining us, just please make sure you like, share and comment on this show, whether you're watching it live or otherwise. And do make sure, if you want to take advantage of discounts on my website, use the code podcast10 on any of the products that you are interested in purchasing. So Chris, I would love to know, before I introduce you fully, what are you passionate about in life right now?
Wow, great question. Honestly, I'm the most passionate about my career, but I don't think it's in the way people typically would explain that. Like my personal brand, that part of what I do and the content I create is my hobby. It's that simple. So I don't have any hobbies, a couple video games, a couple little ones, but I'm passionate about scaling my knowledge to as many people as possible that need help with marketing and sales. I love doing it. I love talking about it. Lead conversion, the intersection of marketing, sales, and tech is my passion.
Do you know, I love that. And I think it's so important in today's world because it's such a complex, for me personally anyway. You may have a different opinion, but I think it's become such a complex and cluttered landscape in the context of marketing, because there's so many different avenues that you can take in order to market your product. And when you are new to the business of marketing, it can be really difficult to know which avenue is going to be the most effective for you and how to best use the social media platforms. And I know I'm certainly a bit of a rookie in this space too, to make sure that you do the best that you can with the assets that you have available to market your product. So let me introduce you, for those that don't know Chris, in the context of marketing. Chris is an acclaimed digital marketing expert, real estate leads generation and conversion expert, as well as the best-selling author of the Conversion Code, which I've read here. And I have to say, this is one of the best marketing books I have ever read. I have a list as long as my arm, and it's growing, to like simple, actionable steps, which I love. That's how my brain works. He co-founded the SaaS marketing platform Curaytor, which is an Inc. 500 fastest growing business, which has helped countless businesses convert leads to successful clients. And he's also a former C-level executive of Dotloop, who helped lead to their acquisition by Zillow for 108 million. And he implemented the blueprint from his best-selling book to organically grow his own company to over 8 figures in recurring revenue annually, which is amazing. And I know that the Conversion Code has become a required reading list for marketing courses at Johns Hopkins University. And it's also, you've been sold out at events with Gary Vaynerchuk, which he doesn't normally know by, among other people. So really excited to have you on the show to share your knowledge. But we're not just about that today. It's also talking about your brain health journey, which is another aspect I don't think you talk too much about, from what I've seen on the
I think you were the first doctor to interview me, and especially, not that you're a brain doctor, but the idea of this topic and the title of your podcast, I've never approached it that way.
Wow. And I'm really honored to have you to talk about it, because sometimes it's really difficult for people to share the depths of how their brain really functions. And I think because there can be sometimes such a stigma with mental health, just by the word mental has got a stigma in its own right by virtue of the history of the word, that people can struggle to express how their brain truly functions. And I have a unique functioning brain. I have bits of my brain that work too hard, bits that don't work hard enough, and damage from multiple knocks from falling off bikes and skis and all sorts of things that has affected my cognitive performance. But I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
until I did the research and went to a clinic, the Amen clinics, got my brain scan to truly understand what was going on inside my head.
Mm-hmm.
But before we talk about your story, what for you is optimal brain health?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind as you ask that, because I never get the questions in advance. I don't have an answer prepared here that's overly philosophical, but I think that the to me, when I think about optimal brain health, I think about the conversation with your inner voice being positive.
Ah, I love that.
And
I love that.
there's probably a lot of chemicals and decisions you make that sort of lead to that, but to me, that is when my brain is operating at its best. That's what's happening.
You're being kind to yourself.
I'm being positive
Positive.
about life and myself, starting with myself, yes, but also about circumstances, challenges, the people that I'm meeting, the things that I've been through. Yeah.
And has there ever been a time when you haven't been positive in the context of the conversations you're having with yourself?
Every day.
Every day.
Moments of every day. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I think what happens, at least for me, is you go through these cycles or these phases, and you start to think that's the way things are going to be, and that's the way things are, and that's sort of what your brain is, and the brain changes. I can tell you that. I mean, I went through months and months of laying in bed with racing thoughts,
Wow.
and it is the worst thing. And before I went through all this stuff, I wouldn't even have thought that was a thing. I didn't even know what that means. I would probably, somebody that would tell me they had that, I would probably just tell them to smoke a joint.
Which
I wouldn't
isn't,
have took it serious,
yeah. I mean,
and
go on.
yeah. Well, no, so for me, whether it's being depressed or racing thoughts or, beyond, yeah, I don't spend a lot of each day negative, but I go through these little phases, and I
Mhm.
think what I try to tell myself is that this is a long freaking life.
Uh-huh.
You
Uh-huh.
know, I if I can't figure out how to improve over the next 3 hours or 3 days, I got 30, 40 years left, 50 years.
Yeah.
So it's just really hard for me to contemplate, and I think that's where people get really dark.
Yeah.
Because they think that place they're in is the place they'll be.
Yeah.
And they are right in the sense that nobody wants to live in that place.
Yeah. I've had another guest on the show. I think it was Tom Ruich. He talked about the pendulum swing,
Mhm.
where your state of mind, it's like you're swinging from one positive state to a negative state. And some people have a very big swing,
Mhm.
a very big pendulum swing, and it's at the extremes. And other people have a smaller swing, and it can
Mhm.
change. Like you said, it can change from day to day, and you can go on a bit of a roller coaster ride
Yeah.
on a swing of emotions and swing of thoughts that are happening inside your mind. And obviously your thoughts feed your emotions, and your
Mhm.
emotions feed your actions.
Mhm.
And so it's important to check in with the pendulum
Mhm.
and
It is.
know at which phase of the swing you're on.
Yeah, and also one thing I've learned through therapy and just going through a lot of this different stuff is that you're often going to be in a bad mood and be sort of grumpy to be around, not because of the person you're around.
Mm.
And you should say that word for word. You should just tell them, like, "Hey, I'm in a bad mood, and it ain't your fault, and I don't want you to think that it is, but I'm pissed off because of this, and it ain't you."
Yeah.
And
And I
that
think,
that is so helpful for the other person.
yeah, I
It
totally
seems so
agree.
simple, but you might go a couple days and the person over there, is thinking that they're the cause of this anger or this attitude, and it's some completely different thing that it is.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, I don't know. I don't like giving tips. We said there's no advice. What is it? What is it, Dr.
Oh,
Ruth?
this is not medical advice. This is
Mhm.
just our own personal
That's
opinions.
correct. Yes. I wanted you to add that.
But I think that's really important though, because it comes to acknowledging where you're at, and your own self-awareness
Mhm.
is the first thing, is to be aware of your state of mind,
Mhm.
and why your state
Mhm.
of mind is what it is really important to be able to express to people, I'm really pissed off
Mhm.
because some people don't have the because
Yeah.
they don't do the deep work to understand,
Mhm.
and get curious with their emotions. They start to get furious, and it just amplifies and amplifies without them actually getting to the root cause and then expressing it outwardly. Do you know, I'm really X because of why?
Mhm. Yeah, and different people, just they're wired differently. Their approach to conflict is different. I'm more of a let's fight a little bit every day and never have a big fight, and my wife is more try to sort of brush off the smaller little annoying things that I do, and then sometimes the fight is a little bit bigger.
Yeah,
Because of that, because she will bottle it up. And I don't think either way is right. I don't know the right way. I wish I knew the right way. I don't think anyone does. But like I do think it's just worth being aware of how you are.
yeah,
The more and more I've gone through this, and just the older I get and the longer I've been married and the longer I've been a father, I just think it's incredibly difficult and wrong to sit around figuring out how someone else should be so that it's better for you.
yeah,
You should probably spend that time figuring out how you can change to be better for them, because that's the thing that you can control is
yeah,
your actions. One thing I've tried to do, and I wish more people would do this, is let your burden be your burden when you're depressed, when you're going through these problems and challenges. Just That's something I always try to think about. This isn't my kid's issue. It's my wife's issue. I don't let it outwardly affect other people. That's very important to me. And
yeah.
now sometimes what does that mean? It means I'm quiet, which is probably hard for anyone to believe. But I sometimes do flight, not fight.
Yeah,
And for me, that approach overall is a better approach than escalating it and adding gasoline to the fire
yeah,
and taking it up to the next notch. So yeah, if you can sort of figure out how you can specifically better handle the challenges and situations you face, it just sort of trickles down, I think, and life gets better for everybody else around you
mhm,
too.
mhm,
Again, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I know that it's something like what you said is so smart and important for people to realize. If you keep it in, it's coming out.
yeah,
It and it might seep out every day like a
mhm,
cloud,
mhm,
right? Or it might volcano out
mhm,
every now and then. So you do, and I think people where they get caught up, Dr. Ruth, is they start thinking about you have to process it. That, and I know that's what you have to do. I totally get it. But for call it normal people that don't know about this stuff, when we hear something like, you've really got to process it. To me, it's more you can't keep it in.
yeah. I think you need to release it in a manner that works for you,
Hmm.
and the people around you. So I think sometimes when we process things, um, in a thought perspective, and I'll go into this in a bit more detail,
Hmm.
is we amplify the issue because we are reinforcing the thoughts
Hmm.
that we want to so much reduce. And especially if your issue comes from thought generation when you're a child, if you've got um, triggers that come
Hmm.
from childhood
Hmm.
that have no thought pattern associated with it, thinking about it isn't going to help you,
Hmm.
because you just need to release the emotional charge that you have inside your mind or
Hmm.
inside your brain,
That's right.
without having thoughts, because you just don't have them to release them. If that does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And
Um,
one of my friends, he went to prison for a few years,
Mm.
and he was telling me about a therapy session that he had there, and I'm sure he had a lot of great conversations with the person, but the thing that he said really stuck was that hate is frozen anger.
Mm.
So I think almost like hate is the little, day to day, right? But you're angry about something, and it's frozen, and if you don't thaw it, it doesn't. It's not going to sort of get out of your
Yeah.
system,
Hmm.
and it is sometimes not fun. I'm sure. I mean, there's so many people that have been through way worse traumas than me, and so the idea of thinking about it and talking about it and reliving it and talking about how it makes me feel and connecting it to my childhood, like I do all of this stuff. I
Mm.
have great therapists that I've worked with, but it's a very uncomfortable thing to do, to work on yourself like that.
Hmm.
It's much easier to stick your head in the sand.
Hmm.
But I have seen in my own family where you can end up if you ignore it, and where you can end up if you acknowledge it.
Yeah. I'd love to dive into your brain health journey if you're willing to now, because I think there's a lot of depth to it, and I think there's a lot of value that you'll be able to add to people. Obviously, only share as much as you feel comfortable to do so. But
Mhm.
could you take me back to where your brain health journey really started in the context of the unique brain that you actually have?
Yeah. Well, I would just say as a young child, I felt different, and I had all these weird traits. I never felt normal, but I always sort of was able to kind of pretend I was. But it was never over the top. I had very disciplinarian parents, very
Uh-huh.
chores, checklist, regimented, restrictions if you don't do it. Like, and I think that structure was really important, sort of pre-diagnosis when
Uh-huh.
you're just a kid.
Yeah.
That structure, I think, was sort of the foundation of how I've been able to live a pretty normal and blessed life, considering I'm bipolar,
Yeah.
compared to some of the tragic stories that we see.
Yeah.
Um, but where I really started thinking about my brain, other than just, thinking I was smart or thinking I was good at marketing and sales, whatever, I cracked my skull behind my left ear,
Uh-huh.
or geez, behind my right ear. And
How
it
did you do that? How old were you when that happened?
it was semi recently, Dr. Ruth. It was
Oh, was
20.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the thing. It was like 2018. So this is not
Oh,
as
wow. So quite
Mhm.
quite recent. Okay.
Yeah,
4 years
so
ago.
I have a weird condition. I live in Florida. I've always sweat real bad. I sweat
Uh-huh.
so much. I lose so much sweat, and then I drink a Gatorade and think I'm good to go. And
Uh-huh.
if I wear, a black shirt, I have like all the salt rings, on my
Oh,
clothes and
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And the first time I blacked out, I was a kid at a tennis camp. And I
Okay.
don't remember it, but I just woke up on a bench. I had no idea how I got there.
Oh,
And
wow.
no one else was around. It was the only person. There was no one around.
Okay.
And so that was the first time. And then w when I got out of college and I would drink heavily, and I would get real dehydrated, what ended up happening is in the middle of the night when I would use the bathroom, because I drank all night,
Yeah.
that would be the last hydration my body had, and so my body would turn off, like
Okay.
literally, like kinda like crank, and then you collapse.
Uh-huh.
And so I have collapsed several times. I busted my face on a
Oh,
windowsill.
goodness.
One time I fell into a door, and it just like cut me all the way up my shoulder, like a door-sized gash.
Wow.
And so I've had some injury. Like one time I woke up in a bathtub and I had a shower curtain on me, and when I first came to, I thought I was in bed with covers over me. So it's a crazy thing to black out,
Uh-huh.
especially when you're alone.
Mhm.
Well, the time where I cracked my skull was the first time that I actually fell backwards. I fell straight backwards
Wow, okay.
and in a tile bathroom. So I landed actually really hard on my butt, and I almost severed my sciatic nerve. It was
Wow.
all the way closed. And then I kind of like hit and then whipped.
Yeah.
And that's how I cracked my skull and I had a brain bleed.
Wow. Okay. So
So yeah,
it's pretty serious on
I
that
would say
front.
that day changed my life. Yes, it was. That was a really, really crazy thing to go through.
Wow. And do you before we go into how you recovered, do you have like a warning when this is going to happen, when you're going to black out, or does it happen often?
You know, what's so frustrating is that you have a warning that's not long enough.
Okay.
So you do get that thought in your mind, oh shit, it's happening. And then
Yeah. And then you're gone.
and then you open your eyes and you're on the floor. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you
One time I was in New York and I was in the kitchen and it was real narrow in Brooklyn. It was this little apartment. And I at least put my hands on the counters,
Uh-huh.
but I fell forward and it broke two of my fingers.
Oh,
You know what I'm saying? Like I freaking fell. And the whole night, I'm in so much pain with my fingers. And I thought it was the IV they had put in my hand. I didn't even think about, because again, blacked out. You don't know what
yeah.
happens. So, yeah, I cracked my skull and I got rushed to the hospital. And it's the most pain I've ever been in my life by far.
Wow.
I think it's probably pretty close to as excruciating as pain can get, to have your sciatic nerve,
Yeah. Crushed.
squashed. But because of that, the cracked skull was the least of my concerns.
Uh-huh. And what was the intervention that they did in the hospital for you in the immediate aftermath of cracking a skull open?
Well, they did MRIs and CAT scans and all the tests, but the MRI is the one I remember because they were trying to put me on the flat thing to send me into the machine, and I was screaming. It was like really bad. So the thing they did is they gave me morphine, and then I puked it out.
Oh no.
So then I had to just kind of suck it up. I don't know. They probably gave me something else. A little spotty at times, but yeah, I ended up on this crazy steroid gabapentin. I had to take 21 pills the first day.
Oh my goodness.
And then it kind of went down like 19, 17. It kind of slowly over the course of the first few weeks went back down. But yeah, and then the aftermath of that, I had side effects from the brain injury, even though the thing that I spent all the time on trying to heal was more so the back. I mean, I was the chiropractor 3 days a week. It was a lot of work to get back.
Yeah.
But I did end up having to go to occupational therapy for the brain injury.
Okay. And what were the noticeable, because obviously, for people that don't know, head trauma, which is obviously what you've had, and you've had multiple head traumas, is one of the risk factors associated with cognitive decline, and there are 11. But head trauma is a big one for people, and often, fortunately not in your case, but often it goes undiagnosed as a root cause issue because people don't black out all the time. They don't get concussion. They just get multiple minor knocks.
Yeah.
And cumulatively, like everything associated with trauma, it stacks. And so the more your head trauma stacks, the more vulnerable your brain becomes. And obviously, if you have a major trauma like you did for yourself and cracked your skull open, you already had a vulnerable brain beforehand because you kept blacking out, and that would have caused some damage to your brain itself. Would have made your recovery even harder because your brain reserve had been depleted because of the previous injuries.
Well, you actually just made me think of one other thing. When I was younger, I actually had two other traumatic injuries to the head. I was playing baseball, and we're in a batting cage, and our coach said, if you're not the one that's up to bat, do not swing. And in less than 30 seconds after he said that, one of my teammates took a full swing in the practice area and he hit me in the face. He didn't know I was standing behind him.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that sucked. And then fast forward, God, I don't know how long that took to heal. It was ugly. And so fast forward call it 2 months, 3 months down the line, I finally am back, and I go up to bat at my first game back, and the pitcher hit me in the face with the ball, the first pitch.
Wow.
He knocked me down. And
Wow.
again, so
So a
yeah.
lot of major concussions, basically,
Yeah, you're
and
basically
trauma.
telling me I'm shaving some years off my life here with all this head trauma, but yeah. But I never had symptoms until the big one.
Okay.
Mhm.
But you may not have had obvious symptoms, but the fact that you'll keep blacking out tells
Yeah,
me that there's an underlying issue
mhm. Yeah,
that's
and when
been
I
causing
finally had
you.
the big fall, I started researching hydration and
Uh-huh.
electrolytes, and I kind of became an electrolyte evangelist. I love this company called Liquid IV. I drink at least one full bottle a day of electrolytes. If I have a day where I hike or run or sweat, I don't run, I shouldn't say that. Day where I walk and sweat or play basketball or something, I will drink multiple. I also learned that you have to hydrate prior to all the sweating, not after. So I just
Yeah.
started studying hydration, actually,
Yeah.
because I think I actually think I almost died that day.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
Yeah.
started getting really serious about it.
Wow. And I'm so pleased you did, because often it takes a huge blow to ourselves, and in this
Mhm.
case it was a physical blow for us to really take
Mhm.
action and take it seriously. And I know for me, um, when I tallied up all of the minor head injuries that I'd had, I think it was 25 or 30
Mhm.
over the course of my life, which all stacked to cause me cognitive issues. And it was missing words and
Mhm.
struggling with word recall
Mhm.
that really made me think, oh my goodness, I need to take action, because I shouldn't be struggling at this
Mhm.
age with remembering things.
It's
And that's what got
incredibly
me,
frustrating. Yeah.
on my journey. So how did you, obviously you took your hydration super seriously, and that's
Mhm.
really important in the context of our brain health, because our brain is very thirsty.
Mhm.
And we know from imaging that and work done by the Amen clinics and many other people, that when we're dehydrated, we have a significant depletion in our cognitive performance. So
Mhm.
what other steps did you take to help repair your damaged
Mhm.
brain?
Well, the occupational therapy was really helpful, but it was just sort of embarrassing and sort of humiliating to mess up on stuff that was so basic. I remember there was a pamphlet in the lobby, and it said "Truckers Cry Too," and because
Wow.
it's sort of addressing this, you cry like, and you are going to know more about this than me, but you cry. Having a brain injury causes you to cry a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so strange. I don't even know how to explain it. It's like you're sad and you're crying, but it's the injury doing it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's still equally, call it, humiliating to be
Mm-hmm.
sobbing. So that was one, and that is not a good one. And you said you were missing words.
Yeah, so I struggled with word recall, so I'd have to
Mhm.
use a different word, like squashed peas was was the word I used from. I can't even remember the name of the peas that we have in the UK,
Yeah.
because it's just become the replacement. But mushy peas,
Hmm.
which we have in our fish and chips.
There you go.
But I couldn't remember the word for mushy peas, so it would
Hmm.
become squash peas. Or I put my keys down and wouldn't have
Hmm.
a clue where I've put them. And it
Hmm.
was common for me to forget things.
Hmm.
Not so common now, because I've done some rehab on my brain.
Hmm.
But historically, it was pretty bad.
Hmm. Yeah, I had a similar thing with words where I would substitute the word I thought I was saying for a different word that was like very similar,
Hmm.
but it was completely wrong. And the thing that really sucked was I didn't know when I did it. That for me was really humiliating because the people you're with start looking at you funny, and you're like, "Oh God, what did I say?" You don't know. You really don't,
Yeah,
like the Freudian slip or whatever it is where you
yeah.
misspeak. And some people might be aware of it, but I wasn't aware of it. And I'll tell you, this is a funny little run-in, but I came home from work one day, and we live in Florida. You know, we've got a beautiful pool. It's a nice day. Kind of got off early, and you know, I came home and I basically said, "Hey, you guys want to hop in the pool?" You know, I said, "Lucas, you want to go in the pool with your mother and I?" That's what I said.
Yeah.
And they just stared at me like with their jaws open, and I just was like, "Oh my God." And I said, "Do you want to hop in the shower with your mother and I?"
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You know, DCF, come get this guy. You know, so it sucked, and that made me sad too. That I misspoke, and I'm a speaker. So I do
Yeah.
for a living. I'm in sales. I talk. That's my thing. And it's so weird. I don't even know if I've ever shared this, but I thought about the Red Hot Chili Peppers song a lot, where he says, you know, a slit in my throat is all I ever had. You know, you know, that's his talent. That's his gift. That's mine.
Yeah.
So saying the wrong words, it was so frustrating. And you have to take these little tests, and, you know, they see how quickly you get it done. And then that way they can measure how quickly you do it the next time. And you have to try to say this many words, and it sucks when you can't do it, because you sit there and you know you should be able to. And it's just like, you just feel so dumb. And
Yeah.
it's almost like what we talked about before with the mental health stuff. You just sort of feel like that's how your brain is now.
Yeah.
And I was just like, man, I'm going to be on stage in front of 5,000 people, and I'm going to say the wrong word. I'm not going to know that I did.
Yeah.
That was kind of like my naked public speaking fear. You know, everyone has that sort of scary dream where they have to speak in front of everyone and they're naked. It's like, I love speaking in front of everyone, but yeah, it shook me. So I just did the OT to answer your question. I went to the sessions. I showed up every time. I never skipped any of them. I took them serious, and didn't probably work on as much stuff as I should have when I wasn't there, but I played little games and did little things that they recommend that you do, and Sudoku and these things that cause your brain to, I don't know, re-trigger, re-fire or something. And well,
you rebuilt your connections because they would have been damaged and bruised as a result of the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things you would be doing is building new connections to replace the ones that were no longer there, which is why your word recall would have been a bit wonky, because your brain was naturally pulling the nearest word it could find that was related to the one that you wanted to use.
Yeah.
And so you had to rewire and recapture that network.
Yeah, that became very important after that day. You know, it was just the ultimate awkwardness. But yeah, and then the other part was equilibrium. So, and again, I don't know much about this stuff, but I know that your equilibrium, I guess, is in your ear. And because I cracked my skull right behind my ear and had a brain bleed right there, I would lose my balance, which also sucked. And so I had to do a bunch of stuff where, you know, I would have to look straight up and walk in a line, and, you know, not go left or right. I had to do a bunch of balance boards and stand on. There was a bunch of that too.
And did you manage to get it back, or do you still have trouble with your balance?
I got it. I would say I got it most of the way back. I would say occasionally I don't, it's not like I'm tripping or falling or anything like that at all. Every now and then I'll kind of take a little hop step, I would call it. But yeah, I got it back. And that one also was just sort of like, you know, just thinking that you're going to be that way, and that you're going to, you know, I couldn't, you know, it wasn't that I wasn't walking straight, but yeah, sometimes I wasn't walking straight, and that sucked. And just to, again, not have control over it. Like that's just the most frustrating part, right? I actually, because I'm always breaking everything, I broke my elbow recently, and I can't bend it. It won't bend as far as it needs to. And I'm a couple weeks into a long physical therapy process, and I have the at-home things to do, but it's just like, I just want to bend it and it won't bend, and it just sucks. And so I just start thinking my arm's going to be like that forever. And meanwhile, if you followed up with me in about 8 weeks, it'll probably have full mobility again. And so whether it's physical, mental, I think that's a common trait, I think, in people, is that they think that the way the thing is today is the way the thing is.
I agree with you there. I think, you know, we've have this fixed mindset, don't we? And I think it's come from the fact that people used to think that their brain was a fixed object and it wasn't able to change, because that was historically what people believed. But actually, your brain is incredibly intelligent and incredibly malleable and incredibly able to adapt to the environment, adapt to the situation, to repair itself. But we need to give ourselves permission to repair our brain. We need to allow it, give it the right environment for it to repair. And it's the same with our body as well. You know, we need, you know, for you to repair your elbow, you can't be playing tennis every day.
Correct.
That's not going to work.
Yes.
And it's the same with our brain. We, you know, if we are struggling in whatever brain struggle it may be, whether it's a mental health issue, in a head trauma, or cognitive issue like I discussed where you're forgetting your words, you need to create the right environment to help your brain have the best chance of recovery, and know that whatever the recovery state is, you can get even better if you do the right things and avoid doing the things that hurt it.
Yeah, that's I never thought about it that way. You can almost get back to maybe 102% of what you had before.
Oh no, you can do more than that. You know, people who think you know, their brain is in decline you know, later on in their years, can actually get a much better brain than they had previously if they do the right brain training, both you know, mental exercises, and feed their brain the right things that it needs.
Well, let me ask you a curveball question then. Let me ask you a tricky one.
Okay.
Is that also true if someone is Alzheimer's, dementia?
Yeah.
Do you have you studied this or read about this, the idea that same concept, the decline is happening rapidly, you can climb back up? Because it seems like a lot of people are skeptical that
yeah, no, you can absolutely reverse cognitive decline. And often people are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease have actually mineral deficiencies, and when they supplement with the appropriate supplements, and we did there's a podcast on this that I'll post in the show notes, is that you can reverse cognitive decline, and even in people with early on stage dementia. And they actually have reversed it to the point that they no longer have the attributes of Alzheimer's disease.
Wow.
So, and it's not with drugs, because drugs very much specifically target a particular process, a chemical process, and often the side effects of everything else, because you've put this drug in your system, can be worse than actual the benefit of the drug. And what our brain needs is the right nutrients. It's like you need to feed, and you talked about hydration is so important, is, you know, think of your brain as your garden. You have to water it with the right water. You have to feed it, you have to give it the right plant food, and every cell might need a different type of food. And you have to know what plants you've got in your garden, so which foods you need, you know, which foods you need to use to feed the plants. And so one of the things that people are more and more deficient in now is, or two things that are really key in the context of cognitive health, is omega-3 status. And often people are deficient in that in the context of cognitive decline, and B12. And what's happened historically, I'm sorry if I'm getting geeky, but you just...
No, I told you I was hoping we could use part of the time to learn. I'm sure the audience is learning too.
Well, what has happened historically is people have looked at omega-3 and how it improves your cognitive function. And then they've looked at B12 in isolation. But as with everything, they work together. And everything in nature tends to work together in ourselves, because ourselves, we are just a vessel of an enormous array of bacteria, virus, fungi. We're just like a host for an entire community that's bigger than the number of people we have on the planet. And most of our DNA is actually viral or based on our fungi makeup that we have inside us. But in essence, we have to look at things that work together. We can't look at things in isolation, and it's an emerging science. But as I said, the two key things are often deficient, and you have to do both of them and optimize both of them, is B12 and omega-3 to enhance your cognitive function, and also minimize and reduce the risk of cognitive decline and reverse it as well. And that's no drug, super cheap. But if everybody did that, we'd have a significant impact in the context of Alzheimer's disease globally. If we all
I know my wife would love to hear you say that the side effects can be worse than the thing that it's trying to treat, because she and I sometimes disagree when she'll be dealing with some type of pain for an issue she may be going through at the time. And I'm sort of just like, hey, this is going to pass, so why not grab the Tylenol, grab the ibuprofen? I'm not suggesting that she, goes to the doctor and gets the Percocets or the Oxy. I'm just saying, grab a couple Tylenol. Like, I hate to see her in pain. It sucks. And so that's pain management, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. She is pretty bullish on the fact that the upside of those Tylenols is maybe not better than the downside of now being a Tylenoler, right?
Yeah.
And that's probably a minor example because it's Tylenol, ibuprofen, those things maybe don't have as much of a bad side effect. But I think that we as a society are probably too quick to grab even the Tylenol.
Sure, absolutely.
And watching her, it isn't that she's level 10 pain. If my wife was in real serious pain, she would want something to help her with that.
Yeah.
But it is inspiring to see her call it push through level 2.
Yeah.
And not feel like she needs this regimen of pills, because I'm sure it would help.
Yeah.
I'm sure it might take her from a 2 to a 1.
Yeah.
But what is that long-term impact? It's an interesting topic.
Yeah. I mean, I think the other thing on just pain in general is there's lots of different types of pain. And I'll go, you mentioned that your elbow. So I have a shoulder issue, and I had a hip issue recently. I went to see a physio about, and he said a lot of the pain that you're experiencing in your hip is in your head, because my brain had said, hey, everybody. Hey, hip, this is super painful. Let's freeze the joint so it doesn't move because you're experiencing pain. But actually, the pain level from a physical perspective was much less. And I was amplifying it by what I was telling myself, my brain was telling my body to do. So I had to use havening, which is one of the psychosensory techniques I use for my clients to unchain their pain, to remove the psychological pain that was attached to my physical pain. So often we may be treating people who have pain with a drug that addresses the physical component, but does nothing to address the psychological component, the emotional component, the mental component in terms of the thoughts that you might be having, and the spiritual component, which is how it's affecting your outlook on life and your purpose and your values. And so there's, there's lots of different aspects of pain that get rolled up together, and you have to kind of untangle them all.
I think that's spot on. With my physical therapist for this elbow, he was, I was telling him when I take my shirt off, it just hangs and it hurts so bad because I cracked the radial head of my bone. And it's like, it doesn't though. It did. And it hurt so bad the first week or two that now every time I take my shirt off, I'm anticipating the pain. It's almost like I'm looking for it. And so I find it. So I that's what you made me think of there, because, and what he told me to do is like attack it head on. Like it is more so in your head than real.
Yeah.
And so the way that you're going to get over that is to take your shirt off 100 times without it hurting.
Yeah. But you can also unchain the psychological association you have with your shirt. So to the pain. So another example, when my dad passed, I was wearing a t-shirt that said "Honor the Struggle" at the time that I witnessed his passing, and there was a lot of emotional pain tied into me wearing that shirt. But when I was able to unchain that pain and the association I had with the object to the pain that I'd experienced, I can now wear it and smile and be happy with it. But we have to understand the elements of the pain that we're experiencing and
it's
have
so
the right
fascinating
tools to unchain it.
Yeah, I completely relate to that, because there was, when I had a manic episode, there were songs and there were, call it music, that I would listen to, and it took me years before I could play it again. And then when I did finally play it again, it was like it was actually a big moment for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many of these associations. When we think about our senses, we've got 5 senses that feed into our amygdala and then feed the outputs from our amygdala, is our emotion, trauma center of our brain that tells us to fight, flight, freeze, or get really into defensive rage. And we need to understand what 5 senses are feeding and activating our amygdala to make sure that we're unchaining the right aspect of it. So we either unchain the inputs that are causing our amygdala to activate, or we unchain the outputs, and thereby by doing that can unchain the inputs. Bit complicated, but it's,
you know what, it actually makes perfect sense though, because you're right. It's either I could either mentally get rid of the idea that my arm's going to hurt when I take my shirt off, or I could physically just take my shirt off 100 more times, and then that'll tell my brain that it's okay. So,
or it might make it worse. And this goes back to the reinforcing the pathways. So sometimes when if we use your shirt example, you could reinforce the pain because you are reinforcing the memory of the pain 100 times, and you only had it once. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's almost like I think about it every day as I do it, even if it doesn't hurt.
Exactly. So it's the same with therapy. When we've got verbal therapy, sometimes it makes the person worse because they're reinforcing a memory they don't want to be talking about because it's too painful.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the danger. We call we have professional therapists, but sometimes they actually can cause more harm than good because they're going into a realm of therapy that's not addressing all of the other aspects, senses that we have associated with the experience. So we have to look at the whole trauma and not just the one verbal component of it or one physical, sensory component of touch, which you have, because you'll have all of the other, you could have other sensory components to it as well that could be causing you to not want to do it, including your cognitive and your visual,
You should do this for a living, Dr. Ruth. You should do this for a living.
So I hope that helps. But going back to your story, so you obviously 4 years ago you had this traumatic brain injury, and you've been through all the therapy, and obviously there's still a bit of a journey to go. What would your advice be for people who have bipolar disorder or bipolar, who are bipolar? I don't like the word disorder, who are bipolar and are struggling with the effects of being bipolar?
Well, it's interesting how you just said bipolar and then the bipolar disorder, because the way I've heard a lot of people talk about it is that, I'm not bipolar. I have bipolar disorder. And I think that's the way that people I think if you're trying to do it the right way, if you will, for me, it doesn't bother me. I don't think about it at all. So for me, it personally doesn't, I don't really care if someone says I'm bipolar or that I have bipolar disorder. For me, that's not a sticking point.
Okay.
So yeah, but I think for some people, it's so funny. I went into the I went into the rehab center and I told the lady, I said, I'm not bipolar because I got way more than two poles. I'm tripolar. I'm quadpolar, because I thought she was trying to pigeonhole me as one extreme and the other.
Into a label.
Yeah. It's like people are not as simple as angry or happy.
Yeah.
Like it's not as simple as like I'm awful or I'm great. There's so many gray parts of the rainbow, if you will.
Yeah.
And so that was something that really bothered me because I
Yeah.
thought that they were actually putting me into a bucket that reduced me to two things.
Mm.
And so that, but again, I'm manic. It's, there's a lot going into what I'm saying when I went through that process. But for people who are bipolar or have bipolar, the first thing I think is you have to understand what triggers the mania, because there are self-inflicted wounds, where the actions that we take are the reason it happens. And that was sort of where I fell in was, being, and you probably know this, but like being like 40, people don't usually find out they're bipolar at 40.
Yeah.
It's usually much earlier in life. And so whenever I, recognized, it was about a year after the brain injury. So when I started acting weird and different, we just thought it was that. I mean, it made perfect sense that a lot of the behaviors I had were sort of the types of behavior somebody would portray that had a brain injury. And so we just thought it was a little bit of a relapse because of that. And it just, so I think that is what took it longer than it would have normally taken to recognize that it was a bipolar manic episode because of the brain injury in the recent past.
Sure.
And even to the point where like that's what we thought. Like I just was like, oh, that makes sense. I cracked my head open and it made me bipolar. I just thought that was how it worked. And I think it can work that way. But for me, it was I have always I've never been a big drinker. I was in college. I shouldn't say that I drink a lot in college, but I don't drink. I smoke pot. I have smoked pot for 20 years. I started as soon as I moved out of my house and moved to college. And it just sort of was my thing. And it didn't make me tired and it didn't make me too hungry and it didn't make me sleep on the couch. It didn't give me all those sort of stoner stereotypes. It made me, happy and positive and outgoing and ambitious and confident and excited. And it just really, it was better than Wellbutrin,
Okay.
it was, that's how I would probably describe it. And so, and as you know, and everyone knows, like you can't really overdose from weed. It's not a thing, but Florida, where I live, switched the rules and it became legal. But
Sure.
it was legal medically. And so back to my back injury, which caused pain all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm going to get my medical card because then I can get it without having to, go see my buddy. Right. And I can also get the one I really need for that problem. Cause I can only explain how painful it is. It's really hard to explain how painful the sciatic nerve can be.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I was just like, oh, I'll get it because I like it. And then I'll get it because I'll be able to get a more, I'll be able to choose. Because, if you're buying it off the street, you can't choose. And so I basically started on medical marijuana. And I'll tell you what, they do a really bad job of regulating it because you go into these shops and they basically say, hey, we're not sure what you're going to like. Try it all and then let us know what you like.
Oh, my goodness.
And so, and I don't blame anyone but myself. I want to make that very clear. I blame myself. I don't blame anybody but me. But I was trying different stuff and stuff I'd never tried. And if anybody's ever seen the type of different, I don't know, there's all these different stuff. Like it wasn't just what I had my whole life, which was just a flower, a plant that grows out of the earth. And so what they do in medical marijuana is they crank the THC up through the roof. And I was ingesting things that were 95% THC.
Oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Super high concentration.
Yeah. And it over the course of, I would say probably 2 to 3 weeks after switching, people started noticing strange behavior. And within 2 months, I had a full manic episode.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And this comes back to the way they manufacture drugs versus food. You know, we like to talk about food as medicine because it's the combination of all of the aspects of the food that work together in your body, because your body naturally likes to eat food because that's how it's evolved. And it uses the environment that the food brings to help you get the best out of the food nutrients that are in the food. But when you create drugs, and I'll just take your example, they remove all of the content that may have facilitated in balancing the ingestion and the absorption and the activation in your mind.
Right.
And now you've got a super concentrated dose with none of the wrappers that you would have had just having the flour, which has then subsequently caused you to have these manic episodes because you've got this extreme, you know, pointed, targeted attack on certain aspects of your brain.
Well, I think you described it perfectly. And that's what I went through. And, you know, it's such a odd spot to end up because, you know, it's sort of like the thing that sort of made me feel like a superhero my whole life also became my kryptonite. So just incredibly confusing spot to be in. And, you know, I've said this a few times. I want to keep saying I have nothing figured out. I don't know what people should do, because you mentioned earlier how quickly people can change from one to the other. You know, people have rapid cycling where they actually change every hour, every day, every week, every month. And that, you know, the people that are hurt by this, Dr. Ruth, are the other people in your life. That is the one thing that I hope other people with bipolar will be willing to admit, that when you're manic and when you're doing all that stuff, you're enjoying it. And you know you are. And you don't give a shit about the pain or the trail behind you. Now, when it's over, Dr. Ruth, that's when it flips. When the manic episode ends, you kind of go as deep as you did up.
Yeah. And how do you manage to pull yourself? Because obviously you've got a huge pendulum swing from the high to the low. How do you yourself personally, how do you manage to pull yourself back up and then avoid your pendulum swinging, you know, super high in the other direction?
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like I'm walking a tightrope sometimes that I have to be very careful about. You know, I caused a lot of pain and a lot of problems in my life, you know, because of what I did. Now, I've only sort of gone through this once, knock on wood, and I plan to never go through it again. I feel like almost like an AA member. Like, it's been over 3 years and I haven't had another manic episode.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. So I do think that you know, it was drug-induced mania, that if I stay away from ingesting that type of stuff, probably could avoid it. So, but for the other people, you know, the recovery, it was a multi-year recovery.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if people believe that, but I was in a dark place for months. And I was in a bad place for years.
Wow.
You know, like a couple years before I started feeling normal again. I'd always tell my dad or my wife, you know, I'd say, oh, I feel like I'm like 80%, you know, back, and 85% back. And, you know, I'm taking lithium, you know, it's not real easy to be vibrant on that stuff. And so, and they would keep saying, you're never going to go back. Like, this changed your life. There is no old Chris. And I think that was helpful, even though it pissed me off every time they said it, because in my brain, that was like my North Star. You know, like if my goal was to score a certain amount of points in sports, you know, that was kind of my goal for this, was like to get to that 100% back to myself. And so to have your business partner and your dad and your, you know, everybody telling you like, that's not how this works. It hurt in the short term because they were right. And it didn't go back. And you are different forever after you have a manic episode, and all the people around you are too, rightfully so, you know? And so, yeah, I think, it's a tough thing to go through for the people that are the caregivers, if you will, you know, the spouses, the boyfriends, the girlfriends. You can imagine a lot of people reached out to me after I went public with this, and I had no idea that it was so prominent. I didn't realize how many people were bipolar. I didn't realize how that leads to suicide, the rates. This will be a crazy stat for you, and I don't want to misquote it, but this is probably close. Only 33% of people that have a manic episode ever work again.
Wow.
Meaning hold a full-time job for any length of time ever again.
Wow.
And so when you start to see some of those numbers, when you're still in that bad place, you feel really hopeless, you know? But you just got to, people say it's such a cliche, take it a day at a time, put one foot in front of the other, and focus on your actions and not your feelings. And if you're laying in bed all day, you're going to feel bad. If you get out and about, you'll feel better. You talk to people, you'll feel better. Play some video games, you'll feel better. Go for a run, you'll feel better. Read a book, you'll feel better. Meditate, you'll feel better. But if you wait to feel better, you won't.
I think that's a really key point, actually, because we forget that, you know, I know we haven't had a chance to look at the 5 pillars of brain health, but I'll just quickly introduce them to contextualize what you said. You remember by the mnemonic facts: feelings, actions, connections, thoughts, and surroundings. And they all work together. So our actions drive our feelings or our emotions, our thoughts drive our actions, our thoughts drive our feelings, our surroundings influence our feelings and our actions, and so on. And our connections all play a key role in that too. So we forget sometimes, don't we? We can really get ourselves stuck on the feelings piece in our emotional state, and forget that actually if we just look at one of the other pillars, our actions, we can change how we feel. Or if we look at our thoughts, we can change how we feel. If we focus on the positives, do positive affirmations, like you said, meditation and so on, can really have a huge shift. And, you know, when we started the conversation and I asked you what is optimal brain health, you said, well, it's positive talking, you know, having that positive mindset. And I can't remember the exact word because I didn't write it down. But it was that positivity, wasn't it, to yourself? Yeah,
the conversation with yourself being positive.
Yeah. And that can change how you feel if we're kind to ourselves. But often the worst relationship we have is the one we have with ourselves. And we're like our own worst enemy, because we wouldn't say the things we say to our spouse or partner or who, you know, friends, that we say to ourselves. And we need to be cognizant of what we're talking to ourselves. Chris, I know we haven't had any time to talk about your book, The Conversion Code, because we're right on the hour. But I'd love you to come back and talk about that.
I'm being a terrible salesperson, you know. But
we didn't even. Well, we did pitch it at the beginning, but we didn't.
But even if it's marketing, if it's sales, if it's customer service, if it's HR, my wife is a hospice social worker.
Yeah,
that's a reality check every day.
Yeah,
you know. So, but any of those things are more enjoyable when you're in a good space mentally. So, just you know, I'll leave you with this. I heard one of the guys that I've listened to for many years. You mentioned Gary Vaynerchuk. You know, he's got a lot of good advice.
He is really
Yeah, he's like a
So direct.
yeah.
There's no filter.
Well, that's what I think a lot of people appreciate about him.
It's brilliant. It's just
Hmm.
no beating about the bush. Get to
It's
the
so
point.
funny how people say, "I wish I could be like that." It's like, well, you can clearly. He's exploded in popularity. Um, but I think the one of the things that he said, of the many things that he said, is that just, make sure that your actions match your ambitions.
Yeah.
So if you're saying that you want to get better, if you're saying that you want to get out of this negative place, or in my world, if you're saying you want to be on the cover of Forbes, if you're saying you want to be, an influencer with millions of followers that has a huge YouTube channel, and like those are your ambitions.
Yeah.
And what are your actions? And I
Yeah.
don't think it's actually that different between what we talked about today and some of the business world stuff.
Yeah. I totally agree. And often we forget that, success starts with the brain because the brains run everything. And when
Mhm.
we focus on optimizing our brain, we can optimize our business because
Mhm.
everything starts with our brain, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that was the quote I was trying to grab from Gary Vee, was that you sometimes have to be selfish to be selfless.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I think that's
You,
really
you,
true.
and that's everything you're teaching people. Work on yourself. Some people call it self-love, self-care, me
Yeah.
time, whatever you call it. But you are never going to be able to be like selfless and really there for others until you're in a great spot, and you have to be selfish, quote unquote, which
Yeah.
just means working on yourself and not
Yeah.
being a servant to everyone but you.
Yeah. It's like putting the oxygen mask on first before you help others. Got to do it because you're going
Beautiful.
to be no
That's
use
right.
to anyone else.
Awesome. Well, this
How
has
can
been great. Thank you so much for bringing me on. I'm glad we didn't talk about my book. I always talk
Oh,
about
no,
it.
you're most welcome. And how can people get hold of you, Chris? What's the best way? I know we've got the links in the
Yeah.
video. We'll post them in the
Hmm.
show notes.
Chris_SMTH or theconversioncode.com.
Yeah, so do make sure you check out Chris's book, The Conversion Code, which I think is, like I said, it's a great marketing book. It's the best book I've read so far in marketing. I've got
Thank you.
100 actions and counting. So I know I'm going to have to go back around and read it all over again, but it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your brain health journey and being so open and honest about it. And if there's anything I can do to support you, with your journey, or any of your clients, if they need any help, then please don't hesitate to reach out, and do stay on if you've got time. I'd be happy to chat afterwards.
Thank you. Yeah, my computer is about to die. That's why I'm lagging. I don't know if you see, I look like I'm in slow motion now, but I will follow up with you for sure. And thank you, because I did learn a lot today too.
Oh no, you're most welcome. Remember, everyone, this show is all about brain health, unchaining your pain, and Chris Smith has been on the show to share his story and his experiences of bipolar and how he's recovered from his traumatic brain injury. So thank you, Chris, so much for being so open.
No problem.